Today I'm working on a tray that is made from epoxy, and I used a mold that I purchased from Amazon. You may notice from this picture a slight greasiness to the mold. I've been using molds with other projects and have been having problems with the mold sticking to the epoxy, and recently I learned why that's happening and what the remedy is for it. Cooking spray is actually the best product I've found to keep this from happening. What's been happening is the epoxy heats up quite a bit when you mix it and you're in the process of pouring it and then it's curing. The silicone can also melt a little bit in that process, causing the silicone and epoxy to kind of melt together. And when you use the cooking spray, you're going to get a lot of bubbles from the cooking spray. So I ended up wiping off excess, but making sure that the silicone was still greasy. So the first layer of clear epoxy is for the sticker that I'm going to be putting on it, so that it is covered and protected by the epoxy, and there's no color to it so that you can see it well. I did the image with a machine kind of like the Cricut, the Silhouette, and it is backwards, as you can see, because I am sticking it on from the back of the tray. So now we get into coloring the tray with colored epoxy. So I put each color in a separate cup and then I pour them one at a time. Going back to the topic of the epoxy sticking to the tray, I also use a torch to get rid of any bubbles, and that could also be melting the silicone and causing the epoxy to stick to it. Put the flame on any given spots for too long, it will adhere more easily to the silicone. But I think in my case, it was more of the heat of the epoxy, because the entire mold almost was adhering to the epoxy, not just little parts where I would have used the torch. So I'm using a hairdryer to blend the colors together. You could also use a straw. You could probably pick up the tray and move it, but I wouldn't recommend that. After you get a design that you like, just let it sit overnight to cure. And I wouldn't do it for more than 24 hours, or you might have a problem getting the silicone away from the epoxy. Now, the last one I did end up destroying the mold because of the heat from the epoxy, and I hadn't used the cooking spray. But this one came off pretty easily. I only had one area that stuck. It turned out that first layer of clear epoxy wasn't quite enough to avoid the decal from showing through. The circle by his hair is the decal that was not covered by the clear epoxy. So I need to fill this up again to make sure that's covered. And these trays come in a wide variety of sizes and shapes on Amazon as well. If you're interested in trying out epoxy, also known as resin, you can find it in your local craft stores. I would start with using the smallest quantity they sell and getting a mold or however you feel like using the epoxy and starting with that. The epoxy comes with two mixtures, the epoxy and the hardener. It's usually equal parts of both, but read the instructions first just to confirm that. And when you mix it, make sure you mix it thoroughly, otherwise it will not cure and there's kind of no turning back. You can't take it off and mix it more or anything like that, so it's not going to cure. I've even tried putting mixed epoxy over epoxy that has not been mixed well, and that didn't work either, so just make sure you stir it really well before you start applying it to your project. And your project could be ruined if you aren't able to scrape it off the surface. So here's the finished product. And thanks for watching.